Hey y'all, it's Lyndsey, and I think Mr. Joey Joyner is going to join me.
I'm here.
Oh, that could be our thing, like, come join the joiners.
Come join the joiners. Yes.
Yeah. So I wanted to come share a little bit more of my testimony, and the more I'm trying to open up and be... We just ate your stomach.
Oh,
I guess it would be trying to be integral. Like, I feel like God has spoke to me about that integrity, and there's a lot of times where I've been like, but what are you trying to say, God? Like, what are you asking me to be integral about? And honestly, it's my life story, and I want to obey God in that and fear God in that and not feel like I have to hide it in order to please people. And it is really hard for me, I'm not gonna lie, because
yeah, I can do.
Like, it's like, I know that I need to do this, but it's like, even before I go to do it, I start, like, freaking out, because there's a lot of anxiety around the topic of what has happened in my life, and just sharing it, because I've lived in fear so long of, if I share it, what's going to happen, and that's what the devil wants to do to you, too, is, like, suffer in silence, don't bring the darkness to the light. And so I've also struggled with, again, like, not wanting to share my story because I don't want to shame people that are involved, but
I want to help people that possibly be in the same circumstances.
Right, like, I can't hide my testimony, almost fearing people instead of God, because I carry around the baggage and responsibility for things that's not mine. And I feel like I'm living a false life. I feel like I'm living... like the secret hidden life almost, when you're not doing that. And I share that all to say I just want to be relatable, and sometimes we don't realize why we do or don't do things until we hear someone else say it, and it's like, oh wait, that's where I've been. And when your story has involved abuse, that is often the case. Like, there's a lot of abuse victims and I've learned, actually, I want to call myself a survivor. I'm not going to call myself an abuse victim, but, I mean, if you were the victim of abuse, you were, but you want to get to the place where you can not live as a victim.
Yeah.
You can be a survivor. Because a lot of times with abuse, you can start to live...
The Bible does say, even though I walk in the valley of death. It doesn't say, even though I camp in the valley of death.
Right.
So you're always walking through it.
That's right.
You got God on your side.
And something I really struggled with was, like, my identity coming from what happened to me or what I did in my life. And our identity can't come from there. Because however you see yourself is how you're going to live. So if I see myself as a victim, I'm going to live out victimhood. And we're not meant to do that. So
The Bible also says God's made us more than conquerors.
That's right. We are victorious in Christ. So, I'm saying that to say I really want this video or any video about my testimony to reach the right people. And right now, God, I just pray for that this reaches people and it encourages you to stand up in situations that you need to stand up in, to not be afraid, to speak up, to reach out for help, and to not be ashamed of anything that's happened to you, because God loves you, and God sees all things. Yes. God knows all things. And so that being said, I shared on another video kind of a recap of my story, but there's so many details, and I wanted to come hop back on and talk about that. So what happens a lot of times is, unfortunately, abuse can happen within the home. Abuse can happen with people that you're closest with, that you never expect it to happen, and maybe people on the outside don't expect it to happen, but it absolutely can, and it does more often than I think a lot of people realize. And you hear stories about this happening at schools, with teachers, with kids, with parents, with children, with uncles, with nieces and nephews. I mean, you name it. This is a broken and fallen world. Sin can grab hold of you, and we don't know what we're capable of doing if we don't make sure we have Christ in our life, and we're looking towards Him to help us change. Right. And these are the kind of things that happen when there's darkness going on. So abuse pretty much took over my life from the time that I was 14 to 17 or 18 years old. And a lot of that looked like grooming, which is kind of like the pre-stages of someone starting to kind of say things or do things that are inappropriate. That
just to see if they can get to the next level.
Yes, it's starting to kind of gain control over you to see if they can take things further, how you're going to respond. Like I shared, there was grooming within the home growing up for me. But there was also sexual abuse going on outside of the home. And that went on for years. Like the grooming at home was different instances over the years, but the sexual abuse was very prevalent from a female that was older than me that went to my school for 3 or 4 years. And then it became a stalking problem. It became a very big issue. And then I came to find out that the girl who was abusing me had been doing the same thing with other relationships with girls that were much younger than her, even girls that were older than me, having problems with stalking issues. And so that's when my eyes opened, because at first I was manipulated. I was groomed into thinking that I was safe, that I was okay, that this was normal, almost like it was a love language. And same thing within the walls of my home. And here comes Layla Grace. Same thing, the walls within our own home. Like, unfortunately, you can be deceived into, any attention is good attention. But an adult that's supposed to be taking care of you should not be showing you any sort of sexual attention. Unless you are married and it is your spouse. People should not be doing that to you. And adults are supposed to be a safe place that you can talk to about these things. And you have to be careful who you tell those type of things to, someone that you can trust, because not everyone is trustworthy. And that is a part of my story. And again, this happens all the time. People speak up about abuse and it's kind of shut down. And you hear stories all the time in the world today, and it can go either way. There absolutely is instances of, rape cases and things like that where, maybe a girl gets pregnant and so everyone finds out that she obviously had sex, but she doesn't want to be responsible for that, so she says it was a rape. God bless you. I understand that that's a very real thing, but at the same time, it can totally not be like that, and girls get raped. I mean, boys get raped. People get abused, and that looks different. There's all sorts of ways that can happen, but pay attention. Pay attention when people come to you about something like that, because there's a lot of things that can go on in the dark. You'd be surprised. Maybe not, but sometimes we don't realize. And when I spoke up about my abuse, I was shut down, and I felt very shamed by my family. Whether they meant to do that or not, that is the way that they responded. I felt very just kind of pushed out of the way, I guess you could say, well, you need to just get over it type thing, or you're calling out for attention, you are, you're going to respect this person, or you're going to have to leave. And I am not going to ask anybody to be trying to respect or gain the attention of someone that's abusing them in any way, shape, or form. I'm not saying to go around disrespecting people, for fun, but I'm just saying respect is earned. And that's that. So I feel no shame in needing to get away from an abuser, and that's what you absolutely should do. You need to bring the darkness to the light and ask for help. It's really hard for me to talk about all this. I don't know if you can tell, because there's a lot of emotions with it, and again, a lot of anxiety has been coupled with this because I have felt for years like I'm not allowed to talk about it, and it's just not fair to me. It's not fair to the people that are going through this, that could potentially make life changes because they hear someone else say that it's okay, you have permission to speak up about what's going on behind closed doors. And I can only imagine how many people right now are literally going through the same exact thing that I went through. All sorts of different ages, all sorts of different genders, not all sorts of different, well, I mean, male and female. That's the only two. And I know the pain that I've walked in literally for years. I'm about to be 28 years old. And I didn't realize that it was actually okay to talk about it. And I wasn't wrong for talking about it. And I didn't deserve to suffer in silence. Even if I was away from the abusers, I was still carrying around that abuse. And, you know, having to walk through forgiveness is an absolute must. That is a command from God. And forgiveness is not allowance. Forgiveness is not saying what anyone did okay. But you can also be living in survival mode when you face trauma like that, as if you're re-experiencing the abuse every day if you don't deal with it. And that is something I realized I was doing from the time it happened moving forward. I was literally living in defense mode, survival mode, like almost on high alert. There's literally clinical terms for these things, but it's like you're super stimulated all the time because you are ready to rock and roll to fight somebody if they're going to try to abuse you. And you start just seeing life through the lens of abuse, and it's a very dark place. It's a very isolated place because you have a very big problem making friends, being close to people, because you're always finding a reason to protect yourself from people. When God didn't create us to be walking around like that. God made us for unity. I'm not saying to, not use wisdom, but you can't be looking for reasons to cut everybody off and just not have people close to you. But that being said, sometimes you do have to cut people off, and if it's an abuser in your life, that's absolutely necessary, unless someone wants to make a turnaround and change. Regardless, if someone is abusing you, you need to take the proper precautions and steps to getting out of that situation and getting help. Do not feel like that you deserve to stay under abuse and that you can try to make the person stop being abusive, because you're just putting yourself in more danger. And like I said, if someone makes a change and a turnaround and I'm going to tell you right now, Christ is the only way that we can truly change, then I'm not saying that God can't redeem a situation. But it is never okay for violence to be going on that is sexual or just violence at all. Even emotional abuse, manipulation, all of that can destroy you mentally, and it is absolutely not acceptable. It's been made too common. There are way too many relationships where God is not at the center, and there is a ton of emotional and verbal abuse where people are using words to just cut each other down, or cut someone down to gain control over them, and that is not acceptable. And that being said, going into another area of my life is my real dad has struggled with addiction for as long as I can remember. And that's another hard topic to talk on, because there's a lot of things in my family that's just not openly talked about. But I suffered severely walking closely with him in his addiction, and other people in my family there's been many people in my family who have suffered with addiction. And it's not a fun place to be. It's not fun to see people suffering in addiction. And I just think that sometimes we take all these issues too lightly. Like, oh, well, so and so's being abused. Well, no, slap a band-aid on it. Or, oh, so and so's, they drink alcohol sometimes. It's not a big deal. It is a big deal. It's a very big deal, because with that is coupled with so many other dark things. And God did not make us to live in addiction. So I suffered a lot of verbal abuse in that relationship as well, because if you're in an addiction, you are hurting. You are not thinking about anybody else but yourself and your addiction, and you will do anything to get that substance. And a lot of times it's at the cost of your relationships with your family and the people you love. And we don't really know how to honestly love anyone when we're in the middle of an addiction. It's just not a thing. Addiction takes over your life, and it's suffocating. And it suffocates the people around you if they put up with it and they enable it. I'm not saying don't love people, but love is not enabling. And if you have family members who are in addiction, I encourage you to be brave and bold enough to say, I'm not going to enable this anymore. I love you, but if you hate me for this, then oh well. Sometimes we don't want to do the right thing because we're too afraid to lose people, and we're too afraid of what people are going to think or how they're going to respond. You might not get a good response. In fact, you're probably not going to, but it doesn't make doing the right thing wrong just because people don't give you a pretty response for it. In fact, it's the other way around. When Jesus did the right thing, he got backlash for it all the time. A lot of times we don't get any backlash when we're just going with the flow and anything flies. So, that's another situation in my life. I felt like I've had to hide that part of my story forever, because I don't want people to think badly about certain people in my family. But you know what? We all have to repent of our sins. We all have to come to the truth that Jesus is Lord, and the darkness has to be brought to the light. And again, it's a part of my story that I've suffered with tremendously, and I can't walk around carrying the responsibility for that, being afraid to share it because certain things get exposed. I suffered with an eating disorder. I share my story, and I'm very open about where I've walked and the mistakes that I've made. And I just think that there's no shame in that. But it's not okay if you are being verbally or physically or emotionally abused by someone you're in a relationship with. I mean, boyfriend or girlfriend, that you're married to. If it's a parent, if it's a sibling, it doesn't matter who it is. Just because it's your family doesn't make it okay. You don't owe that to them. Like, well, you're my parent, or you're my sibling, or you're my family member, so it's okay what you're doing. It doesn't. No, that never makes it okay. If you lose them and you lose something that they give you in order for you to be free of that abuse, well then so be it. God is your provider, God is your redeemer, God is your father, and God will take care of you. So don't let the fear of what's going to happen to me, a lot of times when abuse is going on, the person makes you think that you need them. The person makes you think that without them you're not going to survive. So when you're an abuse victim, you keep going back to the abuse because you get used to it. That's all you know, and you learn to function in it, and you start living in survival mode. And as long as you're trying to survive abuse, you're going to obviously not be living a fruitful life, but you're going to suffer, and you can only handle so much. Don't allow anyone to take the life that God has given you by dumping their problems and baggage out on you, because hurting people hurt people, and it's so true. when I got married, I was hurt, and I had to recognize the hurt in my heart and stop deflecting that on my new family and start dealing with this baggage from in my past. And part of that is sharing the truth about it. A lot of times we feel responsible to protect other people's problems, and to try to hide them for them. But as long as you're doing that, you're still enabling. And facts are facts, truth is truth. The greatest thing that I've ever done and that anyone can do, in my opinion, is to humble yourself and be real about your condition and what you're struggling and suffering with. And it's a beautiful thing to say, God, I need you, and to open up to people and say, I need help, and stop hiding in the darkness, because that's where the enemy wants us, is hiding things. And another thing is accountability and responsibility. We know how we live our life. And even if we're running from our problems and we're in denial and we don't want to see our condition, if any of us really look at ourselves, we can see how things unravel around us. And we are responsible and we are accountable. So if we expect anybody to make us feel better about the sin that we're living in, then we're just living in la la land, because Christ does not ask us to do that. And there, I said that. So, I think that buttons get pushed when we speak up about things. I don't think that a lot of the times, if we're living in the dark, we don't like if someone else says something about it. But you know, we shouldn't have this life to hide, and a life that we're presenting to everybody else that looks better. And I definitely am guilty of that, because I, again, have not been sharing the truth about my story. And God really convicted me, because it's like, Lyndsey, are you going to live for me? And are you going to share your testimony and your story, how I've brought you out of the darkness, and fear me instead of man? Or are you not? Or are you going to keep being afraid of people and what they're going to say or think or do? I used to think, well, I'll share my story when I feel like my family's okay with me sharing my story. And that was silly, because that could be never. But I literally go to a small group at my church right now that helps family members with addiction. That it helps the family members that are walking beside family that have addiction. Because a lot of times there's help for the addict, but there's not as much help for the one that is, the family member of the addict. And that can be a very troublesome place to be. It can be hard. You don't know how to respond to an addiction. You don't know what to do on a daily basis when they're in the middle of it. But for me especially, and I'm speaking to other people that have had parents that are in addiction, like, you are not responsible for your parents' addiction. And you can only do so much for a person before they actually want to help themselves. You can't make someone want to help themselves. And when you keep trying to do it for them, that is called enabling. When you keep trying to fix them. And then another issue for me with all of that was, like, I thought, well, if I fix myself and I was better, then they would get out of addiction. Like, I thought that their addiction was my fault. And a lot of times when you are face to face with an addict, I have at some point blamed you for their addiction somehow. And that was the case for me. And I already shared, there's a long-term relationship issue with me and my dad. He really wasn't in my life. He was there at certain times, but never consistently. And I felt like we didn't really know each other. And I tried when I got older, but then I had to see his addiction up close and really admit that and accept that it was real, and that it was a huge problem, and that I'd been lied to a lot and manipulated. And then finally, after trying and trying and trying, to the honestly expense of myself, I felt like I joined him in his suffering. It felt like, because I thought, well, maybe I can carry this for him or with him, and kind of devoted everything to hoping that I could somehow help him get better. But again, that's not your responsibility. You're not responsible um, for your parents' addiction or their life. When we get serious and deeper about this, we're going to stand before Christ one day, and you don't get to say, well, God, they were really good, they blah blah blah. Like, no, they stand before God, you stand before God. They don't get to make some comments for you. We all stand before God and get judged. And so it's no different here on earth. Like, you're not doing someone any good by trying to make excuses for them or cover up for them or anything like that. I hear a lot of people say sometimes, well, that's not my story to share. And that's right. Like, all the people involved in my story, they do have their own story to share, but that's still a huge part of my story. And I feel to talk about that because I've watched many enablers in my family of addiction, and it just makes a problem worse and worse and worse, and then it brings more people down. You have to be firm and bold when you are standing next to people that are struggling with addiction, and make sure that you're not being deceived and that you're not playing the game, because until someone wants to get help, again, they're not going to. You can't make them. And I think something that's hard for a lot of us is boundaries, and sometimes you have to say, like, well, if you're not going to get help, the whole tough love thing, it's very real. The love is not always ooey and gooey and woohoo, sure, just keep coming back and stepping on me. You have to protect your family. You have to protect your well-being. There's just a lot of things that you have to make sure priorities are in order, because an addiction will just absolutely, it can take over a family. And recovery from that is a whole nother thing, but absolutely Christ should be at the center of that, because you cannot be free from substance abuse or any addiction in your own strength. You need Christ to help you overcome that. So if you battled addiction, you can keep trying to overcome that on your own, but it's strongholds. It's the principalities and powers of darkness that we read about in the Bible. The devil is very real, and we can't use our own weapons to overcome that. So don't be deceived in thinking I'll fix myself and no one else will ever know about it, because the devil will keep you there your whole life and you'll stay in that addiction. That's where I was at with my eating disorder, and as long as I was trying to fix myself, it wasn't happening, and the problem got worse and worse. So it takes humility. It takes saying, here I am broken, I need help, and I'm hurting. That's very hard to do when the world teaches us that we're just supposed to be okay and have it all together. And when we're too worried about what everybody else is going to think, oh, what if everyone finds out that I am an addict and I do have a problem and I'm not okay? Well, who cares what they think? Guess what? They're going on and they're living their life, and you are destroying yours. Regardless of why it happened, no one else can take responsibility for it but you. So I know that's a lot, but kind of reaching on those two things, because with addiction there can come a lot of violence. So again, that can be physical abuse, verbal abuse. Because if you have an addiction, you are numbing and trying to cope with some really traumatic things, most likely. A lot of the times that's what addiction has to do with, is unresolved trauma or things we faced in life, identity crisis. We don't know who we are, and life is hard, and instead of going to God, we're going to something else to give us temporary feelings of satisfaction, but they're not eternal and they don't last, and we have to keep going back to them and back to them and back to them, and they'll take your life, honestly. Hi, little girl. What are you doing?
Yes, so
Cutie
cute.
pie. Cutie pie. Oh, hit the noggin. So yeah, I can get to rambling, and sometimes I think I don't like. I feel like I shouldn't be the one talking because I'm not a professional or anything. But
Look at Moses.
I know, like I'm speaking through my experience and that's the best that I can do. So I hope that this helps someone, and again, this is very hard for me to talk about. Like, as I'm sitting here talking, the whole time in the back of my mind, I'm just trying to battle condemnation, guilt, shame, because
I think you're doing the right thing.
thank you. I just, I don't like when people hear something about someone, and I guess, I don't know. You can't control how people see people. Just like when I share about my story, some people might hear it and think, oh my gosh, I can't believe she did all of that. And other people might hear it and they might see the testimony of Christ in my life and think,
she went through all that.
yeah, like, that's amazing. We can't control how people receive things. All we can control is what we share and our heart behind it. So,
we share what God tells us to share, and it's up to God to do the rest. We just plant the seed. God, He'll water it.
That's right. So, y'all have a blessed night, and we love y'all.
I love you. God bless.